Welcome to the podcast. Nick, thank you for being here. It's great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thanks.
We've got a couple things on the docket today. So we're doing a private equity focused roundtable. A couple of the topics on deck. We've got value creation, the role of pricing, of course, and then some wins in transformation and growth with portfolio companies, things that you've seen work with both price setting and price getting. And we've got obviously Pete and Jeet from our end from Holden Advisors, and we'll see what we can cover.
Sounds great.
I think a good starting point, if you could tell us, Nick, for people that are listening, can you tell us a little bit about Platte River, the portfolio companies, and your role in the firm?
Yeah, absolutely. So Platte River Equity is a lower middle market industrials focused private equity firm. We're based in Denver, Colorado. We have roughly 9 current active portfolio companies. We, as I said, invest generally in industrial businesses, industrial distribution businesses, really with a focus on safety and kind of the thesis around reshoring of manufacturing, constrained supply chains, et cetera, et cetera. So really anything that involves kind of the manufacturing economy and the safety of those workers around it are kind of the points of emphasis for us. My role at the firm as the head of portfolio company operations is to really, the shorthand is any big strategic or operational initiatives that our companies take on. Me and my team are extra arms and legs to help get those things done. So think things like ERP implementations, management kind of dashboards or KPIs or business intelligence projects, anything around leadership optimization as we think about org structure, span of control, right people, right seats kind of concept. Anything really around just what I call Ops 1.0, so things like buying better, procurement, being more efficient, kind of Lean Six Sigma stuff. As no surprise to you, the fourth pillar is pricing, or really the entire kind of go-to-market strategy. We call it whole value margin. So in other words, how do we extract the highest value at the margin level for the value that we're providing to our customers? And it's really, so it's obviously pricing, that's part of that, but it's also the go-to-market strategy and the Salesforce effectiveness piece so that our sales folks feel comfortable articulating that value proposition. You know, we can have Holden build models all day long about what the right price to charge is, but if the model says the widget's $100 and the sales guy doesn't feel comfortable asking for $100 for that widget or can't explain why it's worth $100, then we haven't really gotten all the way there. So the whole value margin kind of pillar of our ops framework is really focused on not only setting the right price, but having the backbone, to steal your guys' term, to ask for that price.
Yeah, that's it. That would be a good place to start, actually. So from a whole value margin perspective, what are the biggest themes that you see from challenges, things that people have issues with, kind of high level across the portcos?
Sure. I mean, maybe the one thing is additional background that will frame why these are challenges that I probably should have put in the intro is that we generally invest in a lot of, we are generally the first institutional capital that's invested in these companies. So we are buying a lot of family-led businesses, founder-led businesses that are seeking additional capital for that next leg of growth. And so the systems, the processes, and the information for decision-making is usually not as sophisticated as one would hope. And so the challenges we really see around pricing really are just starting with the basics of, do you know how profitable this customer is? Do you know how profitable this product is? Do you know your true cost to serve that customer, or your true cost to serve, or your true cost to sell that product? So I think our biggest initial challenge or thing we try to solve, and it's back to the thing I opened up with on our pillars that we seek, is that information for decision making, that business intelligence. So how do we build in intelligence into the system, into our processes to capture that information so we even know where to start, right? And so I think that's really the first stage that we find ourselves spending a lot of time and effort on, is just cutting the data the right way to figure out, is there even an opportunity here? Does it even make sense to go down the pricing road, or do we have other, fish we have to fry?
I had a question. One of the things that we run across quite a bit is, with that first time investment, it's usually a founder operator, and the founder sometimes gets kind of emotional. It's their baby. So to come in and suggest a new way of pricing or to raise prices on customers that he feels like are true partners that kind of grew up with him or her, it becomes like an emotional conversation rather than a business-led or value-led conversation. How do you kind of tackle that aspect of it?
Yeah, it's a great point. And every company is different, right? I think some of them partner with us to like get that maturity and that I want to like maybe that separation or that objective opinion, right? Some people kind of seek that out. And I think as we go through an investment evaluation, we go out of our way to talk about the partnership that we want to build with the founder, with the manager, whoever the team is that's staying, or whoever the team is that we're backing, right? So Jeet, honestly, we try to avoid, frankly, those situations where if it's clear that this guy or gal just wants a check and not a partner, we're probably not as interested, right? And so if we clear that hurdle, and we know that we've chosen each other, right? They've selected us and we've selected them because there's a mutual respect of opinion about how we want to grow the business. We're both aligned and incented to grow the business. I think you can make a pretty data, so back to the first point, right? You need the data to prove out, like, here's why we're thinking about this. Here is what a 1% price increase does to the EBITDA of your business. And you apply a multiple on that. And that 1% price increase just generated, I don't know, $10 million of value. So then you just have a very cold calculating discussion of, do you like that guy 10 million enough to give him $10 million of your money, or maybe you don't like him that much, right? And so I think just being kind of objective, anytime anyone's emotional in those situations, you just have to bring the data into it and let the data speak for itself. And now all that being said, I think the partnership aspect we do take seriously, and it is for real. And while we only invest in the sectors we feel like we really know, we can't profess to know more about the business, especially in the early days, than the founder themselves. So if they come to us back with logical, fact-based arguments about why a certain customer or product set needs to be treated differently, we're going to listen. And I think that's why that partnership approach is a two-way street. And I think, again, it's why it's so important that we build those reps during kind of the diligence process, the management meeting process, as you're negotiating the deal. It's like, okay, is this a person that I'm going to want to work with? And do they want to work with me? So we can have that, exchange of ideas in a beneficial and constructive way.
If I look at sort of the price setting and the price getting processes that kind of fundamentally make up that pricing power that client or the portco would have, it seems like, on the price setting piece, coming up with new models, coming up with new ways to price, that sometimes is an easier notion to grasp. Getting that sales process change, or bringing in new people or new processes or new way of thinking, that seems to be a little bit more of a lift. Is that sort of is that kind of a biased opinion, or do you feel like you see that quite often?
I am I am perversely encouraged that you're saying that, because sometimes it feels like, is it just us, right? The data work's the easy work. I mean, it's hard, but it's the easy part. The hard part is how do you then roll that out to a sales team of 50 to 100 to 300 salespeople to say, this is the new way we're thinking about things, right? So it's a massive change management exercise. And I know change management is, kind of first and foremost in everybody's mind as you think about this. I mean, there's a tool or a framework that I've used in the past, and I'm not going to say it's successful, but it's at least it's a framework to go off of. I don't know if you guys have heard of the ADKAR framework. And it's the ADKAR framework of change management. So it's a simple acronym, so it's easy to remember. It's awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement, ADKAR. So first you build the awareness. Hey, do we have a problem or do we not? Some people don't even know we have a problem. Like, let's build awareness of, we have an issue with pricing. We're inconsistent with pricing, or we're not realizing the full value that we're offering the customer. You've built the awareness. So people say, okay, now I'm aware of it. So what? Then you get the desire part, right? So now I got to want to change. What can I do to have these guys want to change? That's where you do the with them, the what's in it for me. So so you start building the desire around, here is what a change in pricing will do for you. Okay, now I'm excited. I've got some desire to do it, but I don't know how. KK, knowledge, right? So that's where you get into, now let's give you the knowledge. And I think that's where, shameless plug for you guys, that's where that last mile of pricing training, I think, is helpful, or those other sales techniques of here is how you ask for that price, or here is how you work. And maybe it's not even sales training. It's just like, how do I use the system? The system is telling me I need to charge $100 for this widget. How did it come up with that number? I want to know what's behind the engine, so I feel like I know how we got there, so I can explain it to my customers. So there's kind of two different ways to build the knowledge. And then you go into the ability. That's like the actual, or some people call it ability, some people call it action. Now you do it, right? So now you go out and you have to do it. And so do you do it in a pilot form so you can kind of see how the rest of the team is adjusting? And then do you need to iterate and change your approach? Or do you go big bang? It depends on the culture of your organization, so on and so forth. And then you just get to the R part, is the reinforcement. And from a pricing standpoint, when you're talking about salespeople, there's only one reinforcement, right? It's like, what's my money? What's my commission check? How did this work, right? And that's the ultimate reinforcer. And if you've built your process right, they're going to be reinforced, because they're going to see, oh, look at this. My commission check is bigger this month than it was last month. I am reinforced. I am now the pricing evangelist, and I'm going to go forth and kind of adhere to this new method. So that's the process and framework we try to follow. It's not always perfect. It's not always easy. Sometimes it comes out of order. Some people take longer to get the knowledge. Some people take longer to get the desire. Some people just never get on the bus, right? But at least as long as you can say, look, we've got an approach, I think that at least makes the management team comfortable that it's not just this scattershot, like, oh, here come the PE guys screaming about raising prices, and they don't really have like a way of doing it. Like, no, this is how we're going to do it. So if you've got a good system to back it up, at least you kind of win the hearts and minds at the exec level, and that obviously helps then win the minds and hearts of the broader population.
That's great. That's great.
Nick, that resonates with me too, because in pricing, we always say it's, part science, part art is kind of the two things we say. All the data, different approach. It may not be simple, but you can do it with the capabilities that we have in house. And then the art is a little bit of look at what works for the customer, the market. How do we kind of make sure this works? But then when you move it to the commercial activation side of things, it's not only that, it moves into both psychology and behavior. And that ADKAR framework you just said is a great way to walk folks through how to make that leap into the kind of soft skills that are often the more challenging to say. You can't just decree that someone thinks differently,
Right. We've tried to, on the carrot and stick side of the house, like, again, we've built the system spits out the price, and then the price is invariably overridden. And so trying to figure out, what do you do? How do you evaluate the overrides? Are the overrides legitimate? And that's something that needs to inform the pricing model so it can go back and learn and be better. Or is the price being overridden because the sales guy or gal just didn't want to ask for the price? Or sometimes we've even seen the price gets overridden higher. Hey, like, I know I can do better than this. And so, okay, I'm not going to argue with you there. You need to build that feedback loop in there as well. And we've gone so far as to talk about, and this is just theoretical, so we've not gone down this road, but it's something we're discussing of, do you start including a component of commission around rather than just looking at your mark, because generally all our commission guys are commissioned on margin, not on sales price. But do you start commissioning instead of on margin? Do you make a component of it how big your delta was from the recommended price? Now you got to be really confident that engine is returning the right number, because you don't want people to get dinged if they are in a truly competitive situation. But it's something, potentially that's a way to encourage more adherence to the pricing engine, rather than this convoluted series of approvals and like you just approval yourself to death and workflow yourself to death on different levels. And if it's above this, it goes to this guy, and then it's got to go to that guy, and you just end up reviewing quotes all day instead of actually like getting work done. So I think we've gone down the approval path before, and I think it's kind of the road to ruin. And so I think there's got to be a more faster, direct way to get people to adhere. And so that's one thing we're kind of knocking around at one of our businesses right now, and we'll see if we do it, or we'll see if it actually changes behavior.
How did you choose margin as the primary focus as opposed to revenue?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think we want our sales folks to understand the cost of what it is they're selling. Again, we're primarily in a distribution business, and so the prices of what we pay for those goods are generally pretty transparent. The challenge comes where we do any value add and there's kind of labor associated with it. It's like, okay, are we going to start building in a labor component to this, and how do we think about pricing the labor? And we've just said generally, and there's always exceptions, company by company or case by case. Look, the labor rate's the labor rate, right? The plumber shows up and you're not saying, well, can you do it for 200 instead of 250? It's kind of like, well, that's my rate. So the labor is a little bit easier to defend or just kind of layer onto the quote. But to get back to your point on margins, I mean, ultimately we want to sell the product for a fair margin. I think that the question is, do you go cost plus or list less, right? I think that's always an interesting and when you say sales guys are compensated on margin, it almost implies that kind of cost plus basis, which we don't love as much, because I think, for instance, when the procurement team does their job really well and we start paying less for something, should the customer always automatically benefit from our procurement guys getting that product that product suddenly isn't worth less to the customer, it's worth the same. So why are we going to charge them less? So that, like, the cost plus kind of margin focus, not our favorite. But sometimes, a list price isn't always available it's not always available to customers. So it's hard to say, well, this is the list price that I'm going to offer it to you for this discount. So not an exact and perfect answer, but I think we generally try to focus on margin, because at the end of the day, our companies are generally valued by EBITDA and EBITDA margin. And so the more top line margin you have, the more room you have to make SG&A investments, or you got more controllable expenses that at that SG&A level that flow down to EBITDA. And as your EBITDA margins go up, you're naturally valued at a higher multiple because you're a more valuable company. And so therefore we want everybody kind of acting in that way to think about how do I maximize. The sales guys don't control EBITDA margin, right? Because they don't control SG&A or other things like that, but they sure as heck control the selling price. And so we want them thinking, like, how do I increase the margin of this business to make it a more valuable business?
Nick, what you kind of say, what you just said there, to me speaks to what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And I think even to your early conversation on, evaluating an acquisition target and the management philosophy and willingness to engage and kind of have a shared opinion on the growth trajectory and the plan ahead, I think clients have asked us, hey, if in the future we think about a private equity exit and acquisition, how should we change to position ourselves for that opportunity? And I kind of say the same thing. Look, they really want EBITDA. They want a healthy business that's going to be stable, that's growing, that's profitable. Those things are all the KPIs that you want today as owners and managers. And they're the things that, Nick and his team and those like him are going to want too.
Nick, how do you balance short-term versus long-term? It's a question that I kind of wrestle with quite a bit, because when we focus on margin, we focus on that transaction, right? We ask our salespeople to focus on margin, which is the right thing to do, lack of other better metrics that are out there. But if we think about sales effectiveness, right? Sales effectiveness is a function of a lot of different things, including the market. We don't know if the market's hot, if the market's cold. If you're selling a widget, did you sell it because you're a great salesperson, or did you sell it because the market's hot and the widget is in demand, right?
Yep.
That's always the question. So are you incenting the right behavior, or is the incentives not there in the right place to drive the right behavior? And I always come to the point of, as we think through it, is there's a short-term transactional conversation, then there's a long-term. Are you talking about value over time? Are you building relationships the right way, where you understand how you're adding value at a business level, not just that, hey, I went to drinks with my customer kind of a level, right? It gets deeper and deeper, that relationship, that co-creation that starts to happen over long term. And oftentimes I feel like salespeople, they either get punished too much for a down market and things that are outside their control, and they don't get enough credit for doing that relationship building over 2-3 years that develops that account, that has that sort of tie that we all want to take all of our accounts to, and they don't get enough credit on that side. And I feel like from an incentive perspective, that angle or view is a lot of times missing from that short-term focus on margin.
It is really hard to argue that point, Jeet. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think ways we try to combat that, and again, not in all of our businesses, but in some of our businesses, there's a new account metric. So the new account metric theoretically is rewarding the guy or the gal that's cultivated that relationship and that's finally realized in a new customer. There is oftentimes a growth component. So did you take customer A from, X to Y revenue? So we want to reward that behavior. So I think some of those kind of time investments and that kind of just general selling activity investment hopefully is realized there. I would welcome points of view of other ways to make sure that we are capturing that relationship building aspect, because you're right. I think recurring revenue, we always look at recurring revenue. We look at customer churn as we're evaluating businesses. So if customers churning, you've done something wrong. And so is the absence of churn mean you're doing the right thing? Or to your point, does it mean you've got a captive audience and they're just going to you? So I would, I guess in your travels, as you hear other ways and thoughts around how people are measuring that or quantifying that, I'd love to hear it. I think, again, the best we can do right now is probably just a new customer metric and a customer growth metric are really kind of the two things we think about.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's good to hear. Tracy and I were just working on a paper that's talking about that aspect of it. We'll take it offline, but there's some thoughts that I have that maybe we can go a little deeper into.
Great.
The other thing I was just thinking, so you had mentioned earlier incentives or the what's in it for me, and obviously compensation is a big part of that. Have you seen other things broadly that have been successful in that area for having salespeople kind of click into a new mode with pricing?
Yeah, I mean, look, you always try to, as you introduce these changes, you try to also sidecar along with them efficiency gains for them, right? So less windshield time, less keyboard time, I think are the things we're always, sales guys like to be selling and talking to folks. They don't want to be driving. They don't want to be on a plane. They don't want to be on a keyboard putting in quotes or, doing a bunch of stuff in Salesforce, right? Like we know they don't like doing that. And I think, to some extent, they're all kind of just necessary evils of the profession. But if we can find ways to streamline their administrative time, if we can sell to the sales guy, that's funny. If we can sell the concept of like, hey, if we've got this structure, there's less brain damage for you to figure out what you should charge. Or, hey, if you just put in the customer and the product, it'll go to an inside salesperson that'll kind of, do that last mile and get it over the finish line and send it to the customer. And then you're on to the next thing. I think we try to couple those changes with efficiency gains, I think is probably the only other way to incent folks. But the reality is that's what we try to do, but it doesn't always happen that way. So sometimes the what's in it for me strictly is just like, hey, this is going to be a rising tide lifts all boats scenario. You're going to make more money, and so we're going to make more money. And it might be that you actually have to click through more screens, and that sucks. But what's that worth to you, right? So hopefully that calculus is made on the right side of the ledger, and they adopt it.
And then Nick, I know the bright spots is the other thing too. On either of those dimensions, you're advocates and you're champions. It's like, hey, I did this. I was the early adopter and I crushed it. Or it wasn't that bad to click through the other screen, or it actually saved me time. My commission check improved. And then that's kind of the peer proof in the pudding.
Yeah. Yeah. We had one at one of our sales meetings, we would drag the most successful guys up around kind of their techniques and tools. And they would kind of talk about how they grew a particular account or how they sold a particular big deal. And literally we gave them we call it the big Price is Right check. They had the big, humongous check. So everyone's staring it in the face oh my God, this guy made a lot of money by doing this. So never underestimate the power of the Price is Right check, I guess, is the lesson learned there.
I always wanted one of those growing up.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's really cool. All right. Let's talk about acquisitions a little bit, because I think you had mentioned kind of how you think about the portfolio from themes, from a thematic perspective. What other things do you look for when you're evaluating companies of whether or not to acquire them?
Yeah, so this may be a more long and involved answer that you care for, but I think there's really kind of two paths here, and I say it only because we've been so heavy on path two. So I'd like to just distinguish between kind of a platform acquisition and an add-on acquisition. So we've done something like 12 or 13 add-on acquisitions across our 9 portfolio companies, but it's really kind of been centered around like 3. So, on an average, these guys are doing 4 add-on acquisitions a year. So maybe I'll take that one first, just because we've done more of those recently. And that one's fairly straightforward, which is, okay, why are we adding on? Well, because generally it's either a new geography or a new end market or a new product that we're getting as a result of buying this business and integrating it in. So you think about what is our right to win in that new geography or with that new product? How much does that complement the existing product portfolio and geographical footprint? What are the opportunities? Are there things that they're maybe not doing as effectively or efficiently as we could? So, I purposely said that and not synergy, because you say synergy and automatically it's, you buy the company, you fire a bunch of people. It's not always synergy. It's always people synergies, right? It's systems and process synergies that are oftentimes the most powerful things, and that kind of cross-selling synergy. Like, we sell widget A and they sell widget B, and you always buy A with B, and now all of a sudden all of our sales force is selling their stuff and vice versa. So I think those are really powerful, maybe somewhat obvious things that we look for in the add-on world. So maybe now as we're looking to buy a new portfolio company to be a platform for possible future add-ons, I think a couple things we think about really it's always important to have the right team. I'm a big believer in you're ultimately backing people, right? And if you're looking at a business and you're like, the business is great, but man, that C-suite is just terrible. Like, probably no one's ever said that before, right? Because like, how can you have a great business with like a bad leadership team? So sure, do you need to augment like a CFO or a COO here or there? Like, that's always a possibility, and we're not going to let that scare us away. But I think it just starts with, are we backing the right people? Do we feel good about these folks? So I think that the team is always first and foremost in our mind. I kind of hit on the markets that we look for. So it's got to be in that market. Again, for us, we're very focused on the things we know and understand. We're not going to buy a healthcare business. We're not going to buy a software company. We're not going to buy real estate. Like, we just stick with what we know. So it's got to be in that market. We obviously look for healthy margins and healthy EBITDA margins. That shows the business is performing well. That shows they've got a defensible kind of reason to win and a right. We call it like a right to exist. Is there a reason for this company to exist? That needs to be there. And then I think, frankly, in this market today, from a platform perspective, we're a lower middle market private equity firm. We're not going to compete, with Blackstone to buy a business. And so we have to really look at like the deal dynamics. Like, what is the deal dynamic here? Do we have a reason to win? Can we put ourselves forward as a credible partner to get the management team excited about partnering with us? Because if it's just an auction process and who's going to write the biggest check, we're not going to finish first in that contest very often. So really, it's as much of the deal dynamics of, do we have a reason to win this deal? Can we sell ourselves as a credible partner? Can we show how we've taken a company like yours and generated a 3x return for them and our investors? And I think if you can credibly say that, you don't always have to be the highest bidder, because you can show that you've got a real path to victory, making that particular company more valuable because you've done it before. So I think that's where those are the things we think about and kind of how we approach a deal.
How do you think of that, Nick, when from the perspective also of where the market's going? You have the market heading a certain way. You've got buzzwords that are coming in that could be a fad, and maybe it's not a fad, like AI and other things, which I think we all can safely say it's not a fad, but it is a thing that comes up quite a bit for short-term pops versus long-term methodical sort of use and gain from an efficiency standpoint or from a product differentiation standpoint. How do you consider those things in a sort of an add-on or purchase perspective for long-term value creation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think we're we're somewhat fortunate in that a lot of the businesses we play in, I don't want to say there's not innovation, because there is, and I don't want to say there is innovation, but there's probably less fads, right? And by that I mean, like, we own a business that will fabricate and distribute and install conveyor belts that are for use in factories and everything else. I mean, at the end of the day, now there's a ton of different varieties. You'd be gobsmacked by the number of different types of conveyor belts, or what is considered a conveyor belt. But at the end of the day, the process of selecting it, of doing the specs, of fabricating it, of getting it to the customer, there's not a whole lot of new stuff going on there beyond just how do you do it better, smarter, faster? How do you source better? How do you sell better? How do you get it in the hands of the customer faster, right? And so I think we're somewhat fortunate in that we don't have a lot of fads that we have to deal with. I feel like maybe the closest thing perhaps you get to that, but I mean, it's definitely not a fad, because I think a lot of businesses are headed this way. We own another business that's a distributor of hydraulics and things that go into hydraulic systems. And it used to be a lot of, you would sell stuff to the OEM person that was building a forklift or building a tractor that needed the hydraulic to lift the heavy thing. Well, more and more hydraulics are now going into factory automation systems, so things can move more efficiently throughout the factory. Is it a fad that we want to automate more in a factory? Like, no, that's like a real demographic shift, as it's harder to find skilled labor. The graying of the American population. At the same time, we're reshoring more stuff. There's never been a greater demand for it. But there's also all the supporting, that's all the go-to-market stuff, right? Which is important. And like, what products are we selling? And are those things going to be fads or not? Then there's the supporting technology. I mean, you brought up AI. I think we all agree that it's not a fad, but I think we all also agree that we are all struggling mightily to leverage it in its highest and best use form. So, I mean, right now we've got a couple AI projects running, but they are like a classic kind of small scope, fail fast. Either it worked and it's great, or it didn't work, and the cost of failure is, like, I don't want to say inconsequential, but not really a big deal to figure out. Once we get a toehold there and we say, okay, this worked, now what's the next thing, and what's the next thing, and what's the next thing? So we're not going to take AI and say, okay, we're going to get rid of all the inside salespeople, and AI is going to be our inside sales force, right? Like, that's not, that can't happen in the state that AI is in, like, anywhere. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I have yet to have a satisfactory AI chatbot experience when I am trying to buy something or explore something. It's all just these garbage, like, knowledge base. Like, you could tell, it's just, you can almost see it going out to the knowledge base and grabbing information and bringing it back to you. And it's not there yet. And so, like, if I can't do that on Apple's website, like, who's going to be more powerful than Apple in developing something like that? If I can't do that there, then I feel a little more comfortable that my little, $250 million industrial distribution business, hasn't fully leveraged AI yet. But that said, it's not something that we should just sit on our hands and say, well, it's not ready yet, so we're not going to do it. I think we're just trying to take, just kind of rifle shots on, like, what's a very specific problem that involves a lot of, kind of dumb hands-on keyboard time that can be automated. And we're going to focus on that stuff for now. So anyway, that may or may not be what you wanted to hear, but that's kind of what we're
doing. Great. Yeah, I think that's we struggle with that a little bit with, offering direction, because part of our as we think about solutions for our clients, we think about, what should they do today, and then what should they do in the future. And we try to build models, we try to build programs for our clients that's sustainable over time and not just a project. And if you think about it that way, we do have to consider these market factors and understand whether there's a shock in the market that's about to happen, and are our clients prepared for it. So we do have to kind of take those things into consideration and understand whether it's just passing by or whether it's something they have to react to. And AI is a great example of it. And you're right. I don't think, we've got a few clients that are doing some great work around it, but I haven't seen anything be really operationalized to the point of it's driving incredible efficiency or it's driving differentiation with their products or service that's creating incremental value that they weren't creating before. I haven't quite seen that. That's not to say it's not coming. I'm sure it'll be there sooner than we all think, but it hasn't come to fruition yet.
My last question, this is for any and all, any and all. From a Portco perspective, where have you seen pricing play a big role? Like, can you do a little like, here's kind of where things were, here's what we did with pricing, and here's how it turned out, or how it ended up being very helpful to make this change and the impact that it had? Can you
Sure.
an example of that?
Yeah, the example is how we've all come to know each other, frankly. We engaged Pete and Jeet, one of our industrial distribution businesses. We thought there was an opportunity around pricing and consistency of pricing. They spent good quality time understanding the business, learning the business, figuring out what makes sense, identifying the drivers of price, educating the management team at the same time on what the driver of price is, and not to say like they didn't understand, because they certainly did, but really saying, hey, look, but let's be disciplined and systematic about charging a bigger customer a different price than a little guy that you're only going to see once every 4 years, just something like that. So Pete and Jeet built and their teams built a really nice model that took 5 or 6 or 7, I forget even what all the drivers were, of a price engine about, tell me about this customer. How big are they? What kind of SKUs are they buying? Do they care about free freight? If they do, let's offer it to them, but let's jack the price up to cover the free freight. Are they going to be a repeat buyer? Are they a strategic customer or not? Where in the US are they? What's like their purchasing power? What's their appetite to spend? And kind of taking all those factors in would ultimately deliver a recommended price. And then we had, the 7 stages of grief with the sales guys about being delivered a price versus them being able to just name the price. And so the adoption took some time, and we realigned some incentives to get there. But the moral of the story is, we got almost a 200 basis point improvement, and really just focusing on, and this was just focusing on what I call like the big products. There's still a massive opportunity that we're aware of, and we know we need to tackle on kind of the long tail, and just being consistent on the long tail of products. So I think, in my mind, the 200 basis points is just the beginning. We've got a lot more work to do, and we can, and more importantly, what it's done is it's raised the awareness across the entire company back to that, kind of power of margin, to your earlier question, Tracy, why are you using margin? That power of margin and how that drops down to EBITDA and how that creates value for the company and ultimately the shareholders of the company. And ultimately, there's a lot of shareholder employees in this company. So it's a direct link to, I do this, I make more money in my commission, and I'm building a more valuable company. So, the tactics are good. The system is good. That's invaluable work. But I think the bigger kind of intangible piece that you don't really think about is just you change the mind. You change how people are approaching it. You change how they're thinking about it, which is just as powerful as the system telling them what to price it at.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
Wrap it up.
There. Yeah, this was great.
Right.
Thank you, Nick. It was great to have you on. Really appreciate your insights and your perspective on everything.
Yeah.
And we'll see you soon.
Sounds great. Great connecting with you guys.
Nick, really appreciate it.